Part 2: Early narratives, birth traditions, family background, and social structure. The question of Mary's origins, including her birth, family background, and early upbringing, is one of the least historically verifiable aspects of her life. And like prominent political or literary figures of antiquity, Mary did not leave behind direct records, inscriptions, or contemporary accounts. As a result, scholars rely primarily on later religious texts and contextual historical evidence to reconstruct a plausible understanding of her early life. This reconstruction must remain cautious, distinguishing between historically grounded probability and later devotional elaboration. The canonical Gospels provide almost no direct information about Mary's birth or childhood. This absence has led to the development of supplementary narratives in early Christian literature, particularly apocryphal texts. Among these, one of the most influential is the Protevangelium of James, a 2nd century text that significantly shaped later Christian traditions about Mary. While not considered historically reliable by modern academic standards, this text reflects early community interests in understanding Mary's background and offers insight into how her image evolved. According to this apocryphal tradition, Mary's parents are named Joachim and Anne. They are portrayed as devout individuals who struggled with childlessness, a condition that carried social stigma in many ancient societies, including Jewish communities of the time. The narrative presents Mary's birth as the result of divine favor, emphasizing themes of blessing and dedication. Although historians do not treat these accounts as factual records, they reveal the early desire to frame Mary's life within a broader narrative of religious significance. From a historical perspective, it is more reliable to situate Mary within the general patterns of Jewish family life in 1st century Galilee. Families in this region were typically extended and closely connected, with strong emphasis on kinship ties and communal identity. Households often included multiple generations, and economic survival depended on cooperation among family members. Within this context, Mary's upbringing would likely have involved participation in domestic tasks, religious observance, and community life. The role of women in 1st century Jewish society was shaped by both cultural norms and religious practices. While women were generally not part of formal religious leadership structures, they played a crucial role in maintaining household religious traditions. This included practices such as observing dietary laws, preparing for the Sabbath, and teaching children basic elements of faith and identity. Mary's portrayal in later texts as a devout and obedient figure aligns with these expectations, suggesting that her character reflects the idealized values of her cultural environment. Education during this period was not uniformly accessible, especially for women. Formal education in reading and writing was typically reserved for men, particularly those involved in religious or administrative roles. However, this does not imply that women were entirely uneducated. Oral tradition was a central component of Jewish culture, and knowledge of religious stories, laws, and customs was transmitted through family and community interaction. Mary would likely have been familiar with key elements of Jewish scripture and tradition through this oral framework. Language also provides insight into Mary's early life. The primary spoken language in Galilee at the time was Aramaic, a Semitic language closely related to Hebrew. Greek was also widely used in the Eastern Mediterranean, particularly in trade and administration. While it is uncertain whether Mary spoke Greek, it is reasonable to assume that her daily communication occurred primarily in Aramaic. This linguistic context is important for understanding how early traditions about her may have been transmitted before being recorded in Greek language texts such as the Gospels. The geographical setting of Nazareth plays a significant role in shaping our understanding of Mary's background. Archaeological evidence indicates that Nazareth was a small, agrarian village with limited economic resources. Its relative isolation may have contributed to a close-knit community structure, where social relationships were highly interconnected. Life in such a setting would have been characterized by agricultural labor, seasonal cycles, and reliance on local resources. Mary's family likely participated in this agrarian economy, either directly through farming or indirectly through related trades. The simplicity of this environment contrasts with the later global significance attributed to her, highlighting the transformation of her image over time. Scholars often emphasize this contrast to illustrate how figures from modest backgrounds can become central to large-scale religious and cultural movements. Another important aspect of Mary's early life is her betrothal to Joseph. In first-century Jewish society, betrothal was a formal agreement that established a legal relationship between families. It was typically arranged with consideration of social, economic, and familial factors. Once betrothed, a couple was considered legally bound, even though they did not yet live together. The transition to full marriage involved additional ceremonies and the establishment of a shared household. The Gospels identify Joseph as a craftsman, often translated as a carpenter, though the original term may encompass a broader range of skilled labor involving wood or stone. This occupation suggests a modest but stable economic status. Mary's betrothal to Joseph would have aligned with the social norms of her community, reinforcing her integration into the established structures of family and society. Age at betrothal is another factor that scholars consider when reconstructing Mary's early life. Historical studies of Jewish customs indicate that girls were often betrothed in their early to mid-teens. While exact ages are not specified in primary sources, this general pattern provides a framework for understanding Mary's life stage during the events described in the Gospels. This context also influences interpretations of her experiences and responsibilities. In addition to social and economic factors, religious identity played a central role in shaping Mary's worldview. Judaism in the first century was not monolithic but included a range of practices and interpretations. However, certain core elements, such as belief in one God, adherence to the Torah, and participation in communal worship, were widely shared. Mary's depiction as a faithful individual suggests alignment with these foundational aspects of Jewish life. The broader historical context of Roman rule also indirectly influenced Mary's early environment. Galilee was under the authority of local rulers who were themselves subject to Roman governance. This political structure affected taxation, legal systems, and social stability. While there is no direct evidence of Mary's interaction with political events, the conditions of Roman rule form the backdrop of her daily life. Another dimension to consider is the role of honor and reputation in ancient societies. Family honor was a critical aspect of social identity, and individuals were expected to uphold the reputation of their household. This emphasis on honor would have influenced expectations placed on Mary, particularly in relation to marriage and community conduct. Later narratives that emphasize her virtue and obedience can be understood within this cultural framework. As traditions about Mary developed, her early life became a subject of increasing interest. Apocryphal texts expanded on her upbringing, often portraying her as uniquely dedicated to religious service from a young age. These portrayals, while not historically verifiable, contributed to the formation of Marian devotion in later centuries. They also reflect broader patterns in religious storytelling, where the early lives of significant figures are elaborated to highlight their perceived importance. Modern scholarship approaches these traditions with a critical perspective, recognizing their value as cultural and theological expressions rather than historical documentation. By comparing canonical and non-canonical sources, scholars can trace how Mary's image evolved over time. This process reveals the interplay between historical memory and community identity. It is also important to consider how Mary's early life has been interpreted across different cultural contexts. In various regions, local traditions have incorporated elements of her story, adapting it to reflect regional values and practices. This adaptability has contributed to her widespread recognition and enduring relevance. Despite the limited historical data, certain conclusions can be drawn with reasonable confidence. Mary was a Jewish woman from a rural Galilean community, living within the social and cultural structures of her time. Her life would have been shaped by family, religion, and local economic conditions. These elements provide a foundation for understanding her role in subsequent narratives and traditions. The study of Mary's early life highlights the broader challenges of reconstructing the experiences of individuals from antiquity, particularly those outside elite or literate classes. It also underscores the importance of interdisciplinary approaches, combining textual analysis, archaeology, and cultural history. Through these methods, scholars can develop a nuanced understanding that balances historical evidence with awareness of later developments. In conclusion, while the details of Mary's birth and childhood remain largely undocumented, the available evidence allows for a contextual reconstruction grounded in first-century Jewish society. This reconstruction emphasizes her integration into the everyday life of her community, providing a realistic framework for understanding her later significance. The evolution of traditions about her early life reflects the growing importance attributed to her within religious and cultural history.